Welcome to the International Center at the University of Michigan's U.S. Federal Income Tax webinar. The University of Michigan's International Center provides its F&J visa holders with free access to the user-friendly income tax form preparation software called Syntax. While Syntax does not require that its users have an in-depth understanding of the U.S. income tax process before they can successfully prepare their tax forms, we have designed this webinar for those F&J visa holders who wish to know more about the U.S. income tax process and how it applies to them. Please do not mistake the following information for tax advice. Welcome to Part 3 of the Federal Guide to U.S. Income Tax for F&J visa holders. In Part 3 of this webinar, I will discuss filing thresholds, filing status, and form selection. I will also talk about filing deadlines and addresses. Let's begin. In Chapter 1 of Part 3, I will review some of the U.S. federal income tax filing requirements. When does a resident alien have to file a tax return based upon the amount of income he or she has received? A resident alien, like a U.S. citizen filer, must file an income tax return if his or her gross income exceeds the income filing threshold for his or her filing status. For 2010, the filing thresholds are as follows. If you are single and your gross income is greater than or equal to $9,350, you are required to file a return. If you are married and you are filing jointly and your gross income is equal to or greater than $18,700, you must file a return. If you are married but filing separately and your gross income is equal to or greater than $3,650, you must file a return. If you are filing as head of household and your gross income is greater than or equal to $12,050, you must file a return. Again, resident aliens with income equal to or greater than the income filing threshold associated with their filing status must file a U.S. federal income tax return. Resident aliens with income below the income filing threshold associated with their filing status may be required to file an income tax return for other reasons. When must non-resident aliens for tax purposes file a U.S. tax return? Non-resident aliens in F&J status are required to file federal income tax returns unless they fall under one or both of the following exceptions. In other words, you do not need to file a tax return if wages were your only U.S. source income earned in 2010 and the amount you earned in wages was less than the amount of one personal exemption. Alternatively, if you were a student or scholar in the U.S. in F&J status and you did not receive any taxable income during the relevant tax year, you are not required to file a U.S. federal income tax return. However, in order to obtain a tax refund or claim a tax treaty benefit, you must file a tax return. Also, if Syntax determines that you are a non-resident alien, you must file Form 8843, regardless of whether you need to file a tax return. The Internal Revenue Service requires individuals filing tax forms to include an identification number on their forms. This should be your Social Security number if you are eligible for one and employed. Individuals who are not eligible for a Social Security number should complete an individual tax identification number application, Form W-7. Syntax will generate this form for those who need one, including F&J dependents. Before a non-resident alien prepares his or her tax return, he or she should have received a W-2 from each employer if she or he earned U.S. source wages unless the wages were reduced or exempted by a tax treaty, in which case he or she should have received a 1042-S or both a 1042-S and a W-2. He or she should also have received a 1042-S from each payer of non-wage U.S. source income, including any unqualified scholarship or fellowship funds that have been received. No 1042-S will be received if one's income is a qualified scholarship or fellowship fund and one is a degree candidate. Before a resident alien prepares his or her tax return, he or she should have received a W-2 from each employer who withheld wage income. He or she may receive any one of a number of tax forms depending on the type of unearned income received during that tax year, even if no money was withheld. For a list of these forms, see the return form instruction sheet. Payers of scholarship fellowship income are not required to report income. This includes unqualified and qualified scholarship funds. However, anyone who received unqualified support is obligated to report it on their tax return. Resident aliens, if they were eligible for treaty benefits, will also receive Form 1042-S. In Chapter 2 of Part 3, I will talk about how one selects a U.S. federal income tax return form. Like many other aspects of the U.S. federal income tax system, which forms you can use to file your taxes as a foreign national depends in large part upon your residency status. If you are uncertain whether you are a resident or a non-resident alien, you should use Syntax to determine your residency status. If Syntax determines that you are a resident alien, you will not be able to prepare your tax return using Syntax. Resident aliens may, however, select from the same group of return forms that U.S. citizens may choose from. These include the 1040, the 1040-EZ, and the 1040-A. Resident filers may also make use of the same tax preparation software programs used by U.S. citizens, and in most cases will be eligible to file electronically. Resident aliens who choose not to prepare their forms using a tax preparation software program should read the instructions for each return form carefully to determine which return form is appropriate for him or her to file. If Syntax determines that you are a non-resident alien, Syntax will select the appropriate tax return form for you if you need to file one. The forms for non-resident aliens include the 1040-NR and the 1040-NR-EZ. You will not be able to file these forms electronically. When may a non-resident alien use Form 1040-NR-EZ to file his or her U.S. federal income taxes? Well, in order to file a return with the 1040-NR-EZ form, all of the following statements must be true. You are not claiming any dependents, and you are not being claimed as a dependent on someone else's tax return. You are not claiming a personal exemption for your spouse, although you may claim one for yourself. You cannot have earned more than $100,000 in taxable income. You can only itemize state or local income taxes. You cannot claim any tax credits. Your income adjustments must be limited to student loan interest. You are limited to the following types of U.S. source income: wages, salaries, tips, taxable refunds, scholarship or fellowship funds. Finally, you cannot owe any other taxes besides those listed on the tax tables, or FICA tax from Form 4137 or 8919. By FICA tax, I mean FICA tax owed on tips or because the employer did not collect FICA tax when she or she should have done so. In Chapter 3 of Part 3, I will review filing status. Resident and non-resident aliens have different filing status options. Resident aliens may, if they qualify otherwise, select from the following statuses as U.S. citizens can. These include filing as a single individual, filing as a married person jointly, filing as a married person separately, filing as the head of a household, or filing as a qualified widow. Again, filers should consult the status use restrictions that are listed on each form's instructions to determine if they're eligible to use these. Non-resident aliens have limited filing status options. When they use the 1040 NREZ form, they must file as either a single individual or as a married person filing separately, while in some cases the 1040 NR form will allow them to use additional filing statuses. In general, they will also be limited to filing as a single individual or as a married person filing separately. In Chapter 4 of Part 3, I will address filing deadlines, mailing addresses, and provide some other recommendations for tax return and other form filing. Here's a chart to help you identify filing deadlines for different tax scenarios. You can review this chart on your own time. It is available on the International Center's website under Taxes and Social Security under Non-Residents for Tax Purposes. Please note that for people filing a 2010 income tax return, the deadline is April 18th. This is because April 15th is a holiday. How do you know where to mail your forms? Well, non-resident aliens can mail their tax returns and their Form 8843s to the Department of Treasury, Internal Revenue Service Center, Austin, Texas 73301-0215. Resident aliens should look to the individual form which they are filing and look at the instructions. The mailing addresses will vary. Other forms that non-resident aliens are filing should also be filed in accordance with the form's instructions. Finally, I would like to just make a few recommendations before this webinar comes to a close. First of all, you should make photocopies of your tax return and any attached documents that you are submitting to the IRS. You should keep these photocopies in a safe place, and you should keep them at a minimum of 3 years up until the filing deadline. You should also know that failing to file a tax return or tax forms can result in criminal penalties as well as immigration consequences. And if you have received income while you are in Michigan or while you are in another state in the United States, you are likely to be required to file a state income tax return. We did not go over this here, so that's something you should be aware of and you should look into. Thank you for listening to this webinar. You have now reached the conclusion of a guide to U.S. federal income tax for F and J visa holders. If you still have questions about U.S. taxation, please consult a tax professional or attend one of our tax workshops. If you have concerns about using Syntax, please see our Syntax webinar. Thank you.